Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for what promises to be an insightful and powerful conversation. I'm Eleanor, a sophomore at Tufts, studying international relations with a concentration in Latin America, and I'm honored to be moderating today's panel discussion on Voices of Resistance, the realities of human rights advocacy. Human rights advocacy is not just an ideological pursuit. It's a call for justice, equality, and dignity for every individual, regardless of the regime they live under. However, for those advocating for democracy and human rights in authoritarian contexts, this fight comes with incredibly high stakes. When interacting with oppressive regimes, pushes for change can come at high personal cost, and in parts of the world, advocating for democracy means putting your own life on the line. Today, as we explore the realities of human rights advocacy, we will not only discuss the hardships that activists face, but also the incredible resilience it takes to continue fighting for what is right. Our panelists have dedicated their lives to navigating these dangers while making lasting contributions to the global fight for human rights. Their work, often done in the face of severe repression, provides us with a rare and invaluable perspective on the challenges of promoting democratic values in places where those very values are suppressed. The central question we'll explore today is, what does it truly mean to resist in environments where speaking up can cost you everything? What keeps you going, even in the face of threats, exile, and relentless opposition? We'll look at the personal struggles, the strategic efforts, and the deep motivation behind movements that demand justice and freedom against overwhelming odds. I am incredibly honored to reintroduce today's panelists, both of whom have been deeply involved in human rights advocacy and pro-democracy efforts for some of the world's most challenging contexts. Faisal al-Mutar is a passionate advocate for free expression and critical thinking, with a particular focus on fighting extremism and promoting democratic values in the Middle East. Originally from Iraq, Faisal's own journey as a refugee gives him a unique experience on the value of freedom and the power of ideas. After fleeing his home country due to the oppressive environment under both Saddam Hussein's regime and the rise of ISIS, Faisal went on to found Ideas Beyond Borders, an initiative dedicated to spreading ideas of freedom and critical thinking in areas dominated by authoritarianism, extremism, and censorship. His work has been instrumental in empowering young people in the Arab world and beyond to challenge oppressive ideologies and demand political change. Faisal, I'm sure many of us are eager to hear how your personal experiences as a refugee have shaped your approach to advocating for human rights and democracy. Lobsang Sangay is a prominent Tibetan leader, former president of the Central Tibetan Administration, and a tireless advocate for the rights of the Tibetan people under Chinese occupation. Lobsang's work has been at the forefront of the movement for a free Tibet, and he's been a leading voice in promoting the rights of Tibetans to practice their religion, preserve their culture, and determine their own political future. Lobsang, your courage and leadership have made you a symbol of resilience for people around the world, fighting for their freedom under authoritarian regimes. I look forward to hearing more about your personal and strategic aspects of your advocacy, especially in the face of such a powerful adversary. Today's panel will be divided into two parts. First, I'll be asking our panelists some questions to delve further into the challenges and victories they've experienced in their advocacy work. After that, we'll open the floor for questions from all of you for the remaining time. I encourage you to think about the big questions you'd like to ask our panelists during the Q&A section, whether it's about their personal journeys, strategies for sustaining movements, or how international communities can better support human rights advocacy. To kick things off, let's start with a question for both of you. Faisal, Lobsang, what was the turning point for you personally when you decided to dedicate your life to human rights and pro-democracy work? What sparked your advocacy journey?
You want to start? I mean, for me, I would say it's a spontaneous kind of effort to get to where I am right now with Ideas Beyond Borders. But my first, I would say, moment was me surviving my first kidnapping attempt. So that was around 2006, I was going to get some bread to my mom, and that was at the time where Baghdad, where I'm from, was divided between West Baghdad and East Baghdad, and West Baghdad was predominantly controlled by Al-Qaeda, and East Baghdad was more predominantly controlled by Iran, or the Iranian-sponsored militia. So I was going to get some bread, and then there was a car came in with kind of covered men, and they were like calling my name, and I froze, actually, at the time. But at the same time, there was it was US Humvees and Iraqi Humvees coming in, and then these guys went to their car and they ran away. So that was kind of the first kidnapping attempt, and unfortunately I survived second two after that. But what that kind of gave me is that I froze. I did not come with the bread back to my mom. So I had to have a conversation about why I didn't bring bread, which took about 30 minutes. And but really, I say like it was a combination, and I will not ignore kind of the selfish part, which I think it's very important for resilience. I'm using the word selfish kind of very vaguely, is that part of my activism is actually me taking agency over my own self. Because surviving, being so close to death, or being so close to being kidnapped, really kind of struck me as like, do I have an agency over my own life, or do I don't? Or do I let the environment around me to have absolute control of my life? So that's, I would say, the first piece. And then as I kind of get older over time, is that I saw that this is not just my experience, but unfortunately the experience of so many people. And then as we grow up, we started actually, how about we institutionalize that effort? How about like all of us, instead of our own little stories with our own little backgrounds, how about we build something together? And that's where kind of the first, I started a political movement back in Iraq, but then as an institution, Ideas Beyond Borders kind of resemble a lot of people who want to take agency over their own life, and they think they can change their environment and not rely on the environment to change them.
As for my experience, it wasn't as dramatic as yours, because, Tibet, the country, we lost in 1959. So our parents came as refugees to India. So after I was born, when I was growing up, our parents, all they talk about was, their home back in Tibet, how they suffered. And from a father's side of, 7 or 8 siblings, only he managed to get out. From a mother's side, all of them got out, except from an uncle who was, trained as a militia by CIA and airdropped, and then never came back. And then you hear all the stories, from my father's side. One uncle was in prison, then another was tortured, and one ran to the mountains, and especially one of my aunts, because her husband was, humiliated and imprisoned, tortured so much that she became the separatist, from the separatist family. So she was paraded in the village on a weekly basis, and then humiliated, taunted by everybody, especially that was forced by Chinese PLA and officials, but the neighbors have to taunt her. She found it unbearable that literally she was pregnant and she had a young baby in her hand, and then literally she ran towards the river to commit suicide, and then the boy, boy managed to escape. So my point is, so you have all these stories of tragedy, sadness, and then when you go to school, I went to Tibet Refugee School, and then your teachers always tell you that you should be a freedom fighter. So I grew up in that environment, and for me to take a Tibet cause, it's part family, it's part evolution, it's part environment. So I became the student leader, youth leader, and to do my master's and doctorate here at Harvard Law School. Then I was a fellow. Then I got elected as the president of Tibetan Government Exile, and served 2 terms the limit, and came back. Now I am a fellow and a lecturer at Harvard Law School. So for me, I always say this, that those people who have your countries of freedom, freedom is like an oxygen. I always believe that. Those who don't have it is very suffocating. So even though we might be sitting here, with all the credentials and with all the, American dream of coming here and getting all the degrees, and you can breathe oxygen and don't feel the importance of it. For us, it's on a daily basis, Our countrymen is suffering, our country is colonized. As I showed you this morning, even the dams are being built, minerals exploited. No matter what we try to do, we are always repressed and put in prison and tortured and death, right? And the least one could do in a free country is to stand and speak on their behalf as much as you could. Even though it's, as I said, it's Tibetan New Year Day, So for me, celebration is less important than, getting a platform to speak for Tibet. So human rights, justice, freedom, these are taught in classrooms as theories, but for us, it's real.
Thank you both so much for sharing these powerful memories. My next question is, can you share some of the biggest challenges you faced in your work advocating for democracy and human rights and how you've overcome them?
As mentioning, is like it is an oxygen, and oxygen, the environment that we operate in is also constantly changing. So the Middle East is always known for being like, you don't know what the next year looks like. So in a way that the changing forces of the region, and I think there sometimes happens a lot with activists, especially is that how you started is not how you end up. So in a way, it's like what gets you the first act of activism. In my case, it was against an oppressive militia. So I was dealing with a non-state actor oppression, not state oppression. But now in Iraq, it's more state oppression than non-state oppression. So the thing is, like, it's just like in business, like businesses have to pivot with the change of the market and market demands, and is that activists also have to pivot, not in terms of their principles or their values, but pivot their methods, pivot their ability to influence based upon the changing environments, and have a much deeper understanding of why things as they are today, right? I sometimes have not necessarily a grudge on the people before me or my parents or my grandparents, but really understand why we are where we are today. And when we are an activist, we just go with the energy, right? It's like we see something bad and then we take an action on it. But then what I think sometimes needs to happen with some of the activists is that they need to familiarize themselves of why the environment is as it is today. Why, for example, like if somebody says, oh, why doesn't democracy take off in Iraq? It's also good to remember that Iraq never had a democracy. That's what lessons of my talk is. Actually, these are the lessons that I got after I started my activism, not when I started, is that, yes, we really never had a history of democracy whatsoever. And for a lot of cultural reasons or environmental reasons or the fact that democratic voices get shut down immediately to the way that there is not enough momentum for them to build. But it's so good to be aware of that. So when you are having these moments of doubt or moments of burnout and things like that, you are against something that is much bigger. And that's why movement building is important. That's why you should not take all of these on your own, but rather build something that can. One of the things that I love about my organization with Ideas Beyond Borders is that the main thing we have is that we created feedback loops. So as we're building programs in different countries, and now we just work in Iraq, we across the region, is that you have to know what's happening on the ground right now. Like, for example, with Lebanon, yes, 3 months ago, Hezbollah was a major force in Lebanon. Now it's not, right? It's much weaker. And making sure that our team within our organization always giving us the newest updates of what's happening in the region for us, so we can build the programs that are adaptive to the needs of the population versus like building something that it may looks good in theory, but in a practice it doesn't. And that's, I think, is something that I wish other organizations would adapt, because sometimes the organizations become so static and so kind of stuck in the big picture principles without really focusing on building a supply and demand and feedback loops, which I'm sure you study in business schools and others, in which you want to build a product that adapts to the environment. And that's, I think, is the biggest challenge for individuals and organizations, is that how can we build a living organism, kind of like now with AI, everybody talks about machine learning and things like that, in which you get more data and correct. We humans are much slower than AI. I mean, that's remains one of our biggest advantages, disadvantages, but I think organizations and individuals have to build that if we want to succeed in our mission. Otherwise, we're going to be viewed as out of touch. I made it a mission, even though I am under a threat in Iraq and some parts of the region, that I show my face as much as humanly possible, because I don't want to be viewed as the exiled diaspora Iraqi who is like speaking from Western institutions about the need for democracy. I actually try to go as much as possible with taking some risk, of course, but even that is so emotionally important to my team, because we actually had some days in which, like, okay, you tell us to do these things and you're living in your apartment in New York. I'm the one my brother is in jail. I'm the one who got shot yesterday. And for me to actually keep that energy within my team, I actually have to show my face every period that I can to make sure that they don't feel that this is some like diaspora Iraqi living in New York telling them what to do or telling them to take risk in their lives. And that's, I think, part of it, of our kind of feedback loops. And then when I go there, I get to know the region as it is right now, not when I left it, because I left Iraq in 2009 after getting on a death list. I want to make sure that my memory and the world memory of Iraq actually keeps changing as the things change. Otherwise, I will just be kind of somebody from the outside telling the locals what they should do. Which, again, knowing that some conditions do not, this person is banned from entering this country. I'm no longer banned because my issue is not with the state, and the state still has weird relationship with me. But as long as I have the ability to come back, I will always come back.
For me, the biggest challenge is obvious. You're dealing with PRC, Chinese government, the rising and claiming to be the next superpower, and their tentacles are everywhere. So I've encountered protests from outside University of Toronto to law school in Cape Town, to some people walking in and shouting, and Chinese embassy officials following you, tracking down. So obviously, so biggest challenge, Chinese government, and then physical challenges. But we have so many rising human rights activists. For me, the life lesson is that talking about burnout, and it's not that popular. Also, it's daunting actually to take on, because you all have guts and also compassion to sit through whole morning, listening to all the tragedies of one individual after another individual, one region after another. It's so depressing, it's so sad, Sometimes you just wonder, what can I possibly do and overcome this? So to be a human rights activist is emotionally very challenging. So that's why I always, for me particularly, don't think that to solve the issue, whether it's Tibet or any issue that you will advocate, don't think that you are the solution or you are the provider of a solution. Don't take that burden, okay? Because as a Buddhist, we believe in karma. In my 10 years as a president of Tibetan government exile, sometimes there's a project for which I make lots of efforts. I put a lot of resources and manpower and plan. Doesn't work out. Sometimes you make small efforts and it works out. So I always say that leave the result to karma or other variables, right? So people always ask me, you're challenging Chinese government, the rising power. You have no chance, it's impossible, No. 8 empires collapsed in 20th century, okay? So in 21st century, another 8 empires will come and go. So first of all, there's history to prove that you can take on big challenges and you can succeed. But don't think you are the solution. My point is, think you are the bridge. Whatever you are doing is you are trying to help solve the problem, right? If you think it that way, then it will be less daunting on you. Because emotionally, it will take a toll. You get burnt out. Because you always thought, I am the one who should bring the solution, right? And we can never know. It could happen in your lifetime. It might not happen in your lifetime. So for me, I always said, as a president, yes, my job is to solve the issue of Tibet. But my most important job is to be the bridge. As long as I can pass on the torch, I know the empire will come down. I know the dictators die and disappear. I know justice and freedom will always come back. And as long as I am the bridge, if I manage to bridge, when the success happens, it will be because of a contribution. And if it happens during your lifetime, you have good karma. If it doesn't happen in your lifetime, it's okay. You contributed towards that final solution. So that mindset is very, very important. Yeah, because I've met some activism friends who are more angry than us Tibetans. Who are more emotional and more restless than us. I always say, we keep fighting. You have to fight the fight, but relax sometimes. So Tibetans, when you meet them, you just think, did they really lose their country? In the evening, we are always dancing and enjoying ourselves. We crack jokes. We have so many comedians. Then people come and say, why are you laughing? You are Tibetans. You should be angry all the time. They say, no, we are human beings. We have life, and then we have a fight. Both should go together. Then you can sustain. If you get burned out, it's a loss for you and the cause, you see. If you don't get burned out, if you keep going, it's good for you and also for the cause, right? So that's why I always say compassion-based courage. And people say, why should I have compassion towards Putin or the adversary, your enemy? No. Compassion is for yourself, for your mental sanity and physical well-being. That's compassion-based courage. Your compassion for the cause. Okay? Doesn't mean you have compassion towards the enemy. No. Of course you should fight. You should criticize. You should say and do all the things that you should do. But compassion-based courage is you are compassionate for the cause. And then it's good for your mental sanity and physical well-being. Then you are strong. And you can keep fighting. And then you prevail.
That was...
Yeah, actually, I want to add, there's amazing everything you said, except I'm not a Buddhist, so it's hard for me to think of karma. But the first thing where I think, back to kind of the challenges, is that we do have one challenge within kind of the activist ecosystem, is that it's very human dependent. And it's like, most of the time, the knowledge dies with that human. And I think there is a lot of effort, which is something also we're aiming to do, is that we need to have kind of built institutionalized knowledge. We want to, when I think of activism, I think of it through the method of intervention. You are intervening to change reality in one way. And what sometimes happens, actually most of the time happens, not sometimes, is that people try things and then it just dies with them. And there is no collective of all the efforts that have been tried. So in that way, every activist to some extent, or every person who would like to interfere, has to start from scratch, as if like, we like from a veil of ignorance. So that's, I think there's some work to be done to actually institutionalize what has worked in different places and how it worked and what was missing. So in that way, when somebody else wants to be an activist, they're actually being in addition to an effort that already has been created other than starting from scratch. The other piece, which I think I made some peace with, is the concept of adversaries and good guys. And that might need its own philosophical conversation, but I think one of the challenges and I can say general, but also specifically in countries in the Middle East, is that we do have people who love these authoritarian regimes. Every poll that you go across the Middle East, Putin is very popular. Xi Jinping is actually now one of the most popular leaders in the region because of the Belt and Road Initiative. So the thing is, like, before I used to think of like, hey, we're at a war between good and evil. It's always good to think in these terms because they are very energetic. Like, there is the bad guys there and we are the good guys, except that they think of themselves as the good guys and we are the bad guys. So in a way is that what I think made in peace with, which also brings back to understanding the why, is that when you actually get to have conversations with some of these people that we might think of as adversaries, they will give you things like, oh, but authoritarians bring stability. Oh, but authoritarians don't create that much chaos. We have tried democracy in Iraq. It didn't work out. So we actually have, before I used to get very angry, talk about the angry kind of activists who used to argue with these people of like, what is good and what's, but then I started also not and have compassion to where they're coming from. It's like, yes, they're wrong, in my opinion, because authoritarians are also very fragile. They are thought of as very stable, but in fact, we have seen how many of them, just look at Assad, out of nowhere, he just fell apart, and then the entire regime, and now he's living in an apartment in Moscow. And if you ask me 4 months ago, I've written an article saying that Assad might stay forever, so I was wrong as well. And that's something that I'm very open saying, is that I thought Assad was actually a stable dictatorship because he had Russia in his power, he had Iran going around with him. Russia get busy with Ukraine, Iran get busy with Israel, and suddenly Assad went away. So everybody and then I messaged all of these friends who used to tell me that Assad was stable. I'm like, look at all of us were wrong on this. So I think that's we having some compassion for not necessarily the adversaries themselves, but why do people support those adversaries, and understanding where they come from is also very important for us to bring solutions that are acceptable by the general public.
Thank you both so much for your insights, and this leads perfectly into our next question, which is, what strategies have you found effective in fostering collaboration and solidarity within pro-democracy movements, and how have you worked to build a unified movement?
As far as Tibetans are concerned, right, we have Uyghurs who have similar situation, and Mongolians, now Hong Kongers, Taiwanese. So, you're dealing with the same regime, Beijing. So forming alliances is good, but sometimes it's quite difficult. And coordinating, and organizing events together so that you get to know each other's issues, so that you get to be speaker for each other's causes is very important. Often it happens is that regime, the dictator, is very good at, divide and rule. They'll divide among human rights activists and all that. So I always say, Tibetans get a platform, Uyghur get a platform, Mongolian, and if you speak in isolation only about your issue, then it becomes an exception. Oh, situation in Tibet is bad, otherwise Chinese regime might be pragmatic or practical, right? But if Uyghurs and Mongolians and Tibetans and Hong Kongers all speak about each other, then you can, build a narrative that you're dealing with the system. You're dealing with the regime. Something is terribly wrong with the system itself. Then how to counter that, right? Then you can extend that with other. That's why we all are human rights groups here, So that is very, very important because I have had experience when issues come and they just speak only for themselves. They say, oh, if I speak about you, I might be labeled and seen differently, by the others. Let me give you an example. When I was president, I organized Geneva Forum, quite a prominent forum, and we wanted, this in 2017, when the Hong Kong movement was at its peak, we wanted some prominent leaders to come. And they were like, no, we are fighting on our own. We have 2 million people in the streets of Hong Kong. We have very good shot at maintaining our autonomy. And if we associate with Tibetans, then we might be seen as the bad guys, and because you are separatists and you are blacklisted by the Chinese government. And if by association, we will be seen as, equally bad. And I said, well, we'll wait for you, but we know sooner or later you'll join us, right? And then there was a crackdown in 2020, and all the Hong Kong friends outside. And then, of course, we had friends, but some prominent ones. Then they all came, and now we all work together. So that's why, for all of us, even as an issue, I don't want to name names, but we have so many causes here. And I have been in a room with prominent dissident leaders. And then they would say, oh, I can't take a photo with you because, we have to deal with Beijing. We have to deal with Xi Jinping anyways, So, and I said, sooner or later, you will join us anyways, And then sooner or later, they all join us. They all are out in the street. They're not going to get anything from quote-unquote dictators. They're abusers. They're partner. So dictators, they work together. As you might know, the Chinese government has built surveillance systems so sophisticated, so systematic, so repressive. They have exported it to now 67 countries. Okay? So all the dictators that we complain about, they share the same surveillance system technology. And they learn from each other. Whereas sometimes we tend to divide each other, So I've been to many, many rooms. I don't want to name names, and I don't want to spill beans here. But I have so many Hong Kong friends.
No, we need some drama. Can you name 5 people? I want some spice.
But then I'll have to go to Iraq,
Yeah, let's name 4. Just kidding.
Especially Middle East, as you mentioned, Xi Jinping is so popular. If there's a Middle East activist, they will say, you know what, we are dealing with Beijing. So Tibetans, we have to keep you at a distance because, even though we are fighting for human rights, we have to be a little selfish and then, see you, sideline you a bit. I don't want to, now you can guess which country, yeah?
Yeah.
In fact, I've been to one country, one is the government, one is opposite. Both don't want to meet with me because one wants to do a business with and other got, supplies from Beijing, And I was like, wow,
Yeah, and actually to add is that's why the cause of the Uyghurs is very unpopular in Muslim majority countries. That you would think that in the Middle East they will champion the Uyghurs for being oppressed Muslims, but it's never the case because of the influence of China, a significant influence of China. That I actually had to talk to some offices, and the answer is always like, we have to deal with China. We're not going to talk about the Uyghurs, even though it's a Muslim issue. I mean, back to it's kind of strategies. I mean, one of the, I would say, the first challenge is that when you're dealing in this subject, you're dealing with very low trust environments. And low trust environments is, as I mentioned, in kind of when you have people raised under authoritarianism, everybody else think the other person is a spy. So I'm sure you've been to some of these meetings that are organized by some of our friends, in which everybody is thinking that the other person is a spy for somebody. So as a result, that's like the first thing of why people don't collaborate. It's like, okay, maybe this person is, and the sad part of the story is that some of it is actually true. Like if you look at one of my friends work on the Iranian issues, and then even the signal group of that activist was infiltrated by the IRGC, and then one after the other was being caught because one of their friends was actually a spy for the Iranian government. So the thing is like, the paranoia is not coming from it's coming from somewhere. It's not just paranoia. It's real. So that's how I would say the first challenge is actually to get people to collaborate. You have to build a higher trust environment, which is very difficult when you're dealing with a very oppressive. The second thing, which I guess is like, the title of the event is Democracy on the Brink. Is the Middle East is kind of a very unique. Not only we have the best food in the world, but the democracy as a subject is an extremely hard thing to sell. The number one reason is because of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? America came in, America spent trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan, all to replace the Taliban with Taliban, and Saddam Hussein with Iran. All happened under the banner of democracy promotion. So that's, I would say, one reason why democracy has such a bad rap is that it is associated with the Bush administrations and the war. So by default of using the term, you're obviously associated with Dick Cheney and the Bush administration and Wolfowitz and Bill Kristol and all of that, the neoconservative movement. So that's, I would say, like from a perception. The third part, which is very, very interesting, is that in the Middle East we have two kind of systems of governance. One is the monarchies. The monarchies are the ones in Saudi Arabia and the UAE and other places. And these are prosperous monarchies. These are not people starving in the streets like North Korea or even Syria. So for the Arab world, or actually the Arab perception, they see two kinds of way of living. One is the monarchies, in which if you go to Dubai and you go to Riyadh and you see the Lamborghinis and and great lifestyle that people have, and then you see the non-monarchies, which is the republics and other places, and you see civil wars and chaos and all of that stuff. So generally speaking, the perception of people in the Arab world would be like, there is this monarchies, they might be imperfect in any shape or form, but like people are having a good life. Like if you ask any Iraqi or any people from have many friends from Jordan, other places, they will say that their dream is to go to Dubai and make 100K a year and have a decent life and get married and have. They will be like, okay, the social contract we have is that we don't have to criticize the monarchy. That's all what we have to do, but we have a very decent life and overall the only social contract. So the thing is, like, the third part, which is hard to sell democracy, is that what, in their perception, what you're selling is chaos. Is that these are the monarchies, people have a good life, and you're telling them, no, even though there's so much construction in Saudi Arabia, there's so much construction in UAE, you should not do that because that's not democratic and you should go to the democracies. And then the fourth one, which actually connects to the Western part, is that, of course, many of these autocracies capitalize on the hypocrisy of Western democracies, right? I mean, of course, the subject of Israel-Palestine is the most dominant in the region because of the language. But the thing is that everybody will look as that, okay, these are the democracies. They're not as great guys as you think they are. So might as well, as the devil we know is autocracy. And there's so many kind of conversations on how the West is perceived. And there's a lot of books written on the subject, but the fact of because democracy has been associated with Western societies, and there's the long history between the Crusades and the Muslim world. I remember, maybe that helped me another final question. There was a time in Iraq, and a group of Christian missionaries came into Iraq, and they landed in Baghdad. And the mission that they had was that they convert the areas of extremists into Christians, and they came in with their big crosses into Iraq. With that, they went with a group of U.S. Humvees. So imagine if you picture that, there's massive crosses with U.S. Humvees driving into Fallujah. What do you think the people in the neighborhood thought? It was the Crusades are back again. So that tells you like how kind of skewed the perception people might have of this kind of Western democracies, because and what China is doing actually very intelligently. There was a leak of one of the conversations between the foreign ministry of China and a prime minister's office in one of the Middle Eastern countries. And the foreign minister of China, he said, listen, the Chinese and Arabs never hated each other. We never had a war. But look at between you and the West. These guys have invaded you 1,000 times. You invaded them 1,000 times. We are a blank slate. We're just here to make money. And look, and most of the Middle Eastern governments will be like, yes, that's a much better devil, because the devil is the West we tried before and never worked out. So that's really like the summary of the opportunities and the challenges we have in the region.
Because the organized signal 5 minutes, so for Q&A. Oh. Yeah. Okay, before that, can I just pitch in my book as well? Is related, as you said, many of the people in exile, dissidents, are divided, which is true. But then you must understand that people who go through trauma are stubborn. They see through black and white. That's why people who suffered Holocaust or Armenian Holocaust, the trauma lasts for generations. And people who go through trauma, as I said, they see justice and unjust, black and white. And they tend to be quite stubborn. So when you see that they fight among each other all the time, no, they're just being stubborn, okay? You must understand that. So, number two, also because the funder, whether in America or not, everywhere, the funders also contributes to that division, Because left-leaning funder will fund the left-leaning organization, right-leaning will fund right, and the middle of the road will fund middle. And then the funder, often I've been to DC and Brussels, they fight among each other all the time, but you've funded different organizations based on your ideological preferences, so you are maintaining or strengthening or magnifying the differences, right? And what do you expect? So that is very important to understand. Now, talking about the Middle East, again, we are talking about human rights. If you look at the last 30 years, the human rights movement or democracy movement, in the last 30 years, there have been more non-democratic countries than democratic countries in the world, right? Now we have more non-democratic countries, democratic countries in the world. But there are more organizations promoting democracy in the last 30 years. There are more funding promoting democracy in the last 30 years. There are more consultants, who are funded and who are hired to promote democracy around the world. So it's odd. There are more funding, more consultants, more organization, yet less and less and less democracy. Why? Because we all are taught to remove dictators, but no one is taught to replace dictators. So that's why you remove Mubarak from Egypt, you get Sisi, right? Tunisia, you remove a dictator. He's too old. His family has been ruling so long. Now who do you get? Another dictator, all right? Syria, okay, Assad is removed. New guy, he doesn't sound that liberal democratic, okay? And he's yet to go through election. So you can go through the list. Why? We all are taught to be dissident, to dissent, to protest, to argue, to go out in the street, to overthrow them. But we are not taught to replace them. So that's why I'm writing a book. That's my pitch, right? To how to run a democratic government exile. Because if you're not taught to run an election, to campaign and win election, you can never replace dictator. If you don't know the basics of education policy, finance policy, foreign policy, interior policy, if you never run a government, even if you win an election, you'll be thrown out after one term because you don't know how to run a government exile. For example, Lech Walesa, Poland, right? You might all know he's a Nobel Peace Laureate. He's considered the father of Polish democracy. He brought democracy in Poland. But because he was a labor union leader, he won landslide victory in first election. Second election, he lost. Third election, when he ran, he got only 1% of the vote. Can you imagine? Father of Polish democracy, who brought democracy. After 10 years, he just gets 1% of vote. And who wins? The same Communist Party won. Why? Because we all are taught to remove dictators, but we never learn to replace them. So, because I've run government exile for 10 years, I can teach you a few things.
Thank you so much, Faisal and Lobsang.
Another pitch, don't be a consultant. That's the worst thing it can ever be.
Thank you so much for sharing your incredible insights and personal stories with us.